The season is getting closer, but recruiting never stops. And today we've got the latest on where things stand with Deuce Knight, Notre Dame, Auburn, and Ole Miss. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Friday, August 16th. So happy Friday, and thank you for kickstarting your weekend by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And as always, you can watch the show on YouTube or you can listen wherever it is that you get your podcast. But if you are watching on YouTube, remember, like the video, subscribe to the channel, or if you're listening to podcasts, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review if you're feeling extra generous, and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, today on the show, we got Locked On recruiting insider Brian Smith back to break down Notre Dame's most recent commitment in the class of 2025. Plus, he provides the latest on where things stand with 5-star quarterback commitment Deuce Knight and when Brian expects Deuce will make a final decision. Unfortunately, we might be waiting a little bit longer than you might expect. Plus, we talk a little bit about this season and which freshmen are going to make the biggest impact for the Irish. Enjoy. All right, Brian, let's start off with Notre Dame's most recent commitment, safety Brandon Logan. We know he's a great dual sport athlete. He was committed to play baseball for Vanderbilt, which is one of the top baseball programs in the entire country, for over 2 years. But now he is headed to Notre Dame to play some football. How does his athleticism and skill set translate to the football field?
Kind of the same way it does to the diamond. He could play multiple positions. He could probably play receiver, but he's going to play DB for the Irish. I could see him at nickel, but most likely free safety, just body language, the way he plays. He's got some hitting ability. I think he's better in coverage than what a lot of people would probably expect too. So I was surprised that he was a baseball guy so early. He must really love it. I don't study much baseball film, but I'm surprised more schools didn't come after him. But then again, he was committed to Vandy, and academics are obviously important to him. I mean, you went to Notre Dame. It's a little different kind of person that wants to take on that academic challenge. So maybe it took another one in that realm for him to go over to the, football side of life.
Vanderbilt's a great school too. So he had 2 really good opportunities in front of him. And you mentioned it, like, it doesn't seem like the recruiting rankings are very high in him. But do you think that has more to do with the fact that he was committed to play baseball and people really just haven't spent time evaluating him as a football prospect because they didn't feel like they needed to?
Well, I don't think they could. The key, as I always say, is the 7-on-7 circuit, especially if you're a skill guy. If you're not in it, your ranking will not be as high. He definitely was not in it. And he's from Fort Wayne. That's not going to help you at all. So it's a good football city, but nobody lives there that's a scout. So fair or not, that's the way the world works. Nobody's seen that kid play live that puts up the rankings. So until he has another few games that he can put on huddle at least, he's going to struggle in that. He's never going to be in front of the main scouts at like On3 and 247.
Yeah, I get that. But I still think that he could be one of those players whose ranking rises up if he has a big senior season, especially now that he's committed to play football at Notre Dame. And I thought it was interesting that, like, the moment that Ivan Taylor flipped to Michigan, Brandon Logan was the first name that started showing up in all these different reports. So it seems like the Notre Dame staff has sort of been monitoring him for a while. When did he first get on your radar? Was it after Ivan Taylor, or have you kind of noticed him before all this went down?
I had no idea who he was. I got a message about him. I mean, he was committed for baseball. Nobody had any idea he was interested in football. How Notre Dame even found out, I'm not sure. I'm guessing somebody at his school is a Notre Dame person. That's an interesting story that somebody needs to unveil. I do not know the backstory on that, but watched his film. I'm like, it's unusual for a baseball player to be this good, this physical on the gridiron. Like, he's a legit D1 recruit on either sport. Good for him, by the way. But I didn't even know who existed.
Yeah, there's not that many people who have the option to play, to be a scholarship player at 2 of the best programs in 2 different sports. I mean, it kind of reminds me, now I'm not saying he's going to be quite as good, but I mean, Allen Iverson at one point could have played football, could have played could have played basketball at the best programs. Who was that Duke point guard? This is like,
he was the kid that played.
Greg Paulus.
Yeah, he was committed to Notre Dame to play.
I think they wanted him to play quarterback, and then he ended up going to Duke. But then he went to Duke, played basketball, obviously, and then finished his career as a quarterback at Syracuse, but I don't think he was really good.
It is what it is. But coming out of high school, everybody wanted him. So,
Right.
yeah, he went to Duke, though.
So when you look at this class of defensive backs for Notre Dame, they have 6 right now, 3 corners, 3 safeties. At one point, I thought this could be a truly elite group. But now that Ivan Taylor's flipped to Michigan, I don't think they're elite, but I still think it's a really good group as a whole, especially with Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary leading the way. How do you assess this group of defensive backs?
Versatile, length, fit. They have all of that. I think the Dallas Golden is one of the most versatile DBs in the country. He's, if at all possible, a bit underrated because of how he carries himself. I know the high school program he's at. I know that head coach personally. He will come in mentally ready. He's a kid that wants to play probably the nickel spot. Not many guys really want that challenge. Except for quarterback, it's probably the hardest position on the gridiron. He wants that. And he could play running back, receiver, free safety, whatever. They also have Zachary, a guy that's super twitchy and could really run. Creed Thomas, guys. Like, they got all kinds of guys that can move. Now it's just finding out which spots they're going to play because they all can play multiple. I think Notre Dame's got a really good group. And it just seems like every year now they're adding on in the secondary. They're almost the point where they're over the safety concerns. I don't know if that's going to be next year or not, hopefully. But, I mean, if they wanted, they could put Dallas back there as free safety as a freshman. He can contribute. They have very versatile football players.
Yeah, that was my next question because it's almost like they have an embarrassment of riches at corner. Now, Benjamin Morrison is going to be gone after this year, but they still have Christian Gray, Jaden Mickey, Leonard Moore, and Carson Hobbs. It sounds like they've been doing really well so far in their first preseason camp with Notre Dame. And then you add Golden and Zachary into the mix. Like, they are set at corner. But I still have my questions about safety, which is why I thought the Ivan Taylor decommitment was so tough, was because I thought that he was a guy who could play pretty early on in his career. He seemed like physically ready to go. Still don't love any true freshman playing safety, but still I felt like he was the most college ready compared to Blair and now Logan and Ethan Long as well. So out of those 3 guys, like, how do you assess them? I know they're different prospects. Jaden Blair is the more highly rated guy out of the bunch, and Logan and Long are seen as more developmental guys, but how big of an impact do you think they can make early on in their careers at Notre Dame?
I don't think they'll play a ton right away because Notre Dame will probably still get a portal kid. And I'd imagine that some of the younger guys that are on campus, they've had enough time now. Like the kid from Montana that's gotten a scholarship, etc. They'll be okay. They might play a little bit of mop up, but like mainstream games, they won't play anything besides special teams, is my guess as freshmen. And that's the way it should be. Outside of the Kyle Hamiltons of the world, freshmen shouldn't be playing in Notre Dame secondary very often. Benjamin Morrison. Those are NFL players. That's why they were playing early, because they're not like the other guys. So you got to prove it until I see it. Now, Jadon's a really unique guy. They might find a role for him. That length is really attractive, but I don't know if he's like, it's not the physical part with safety. It's all the mental stuff. It is a lot of playbook jargon. There is, before everybody says, oh, just let him play fast. It's not how it works. You have to adjust to what they're doing. You have to know everything. Safety is not very friendly for freshmen sometimes. So they'll probably see more of those kids as sophomores.
While we're on the topic of safeties, it sounds like Adon Schuler, the current Notre Dame safety, is a redshirt freshman. He's really emerged in this preseason camp and has a chance to start this season opposite Xavier Watch, which I think took a lot of people by surprise because Notre Dame went to the transfer portal. They added Rod Hurd from Northwestern. He's played like 1 million snaps in college, so everyone was like, oh, he's just going to be the starter. Now Schuler seems to be making a real case to be the starter, maybe even week 1. Were you surprised by that? Like, when you evaluated him in high school, did you see this type of rise happening for Schuler?
I'm not really shocked because I knew his body wasn't quite filled out, and he played pretty good football in high school in terms of the competition. So it was really kind of up to him. Again, just like I just mentioned with the freshman that you're talking about with safety, it's going to be above the shoulder stuff. And that's why safety rankings, a little bit like quarterback, can be iffy. So many of the kids don't make it. It has nothing to do with how they look on the hoof. They're running the wrong direction, no matter how fast they are. You got to also direct the other players. If you're the true free safety of the group, strong safety might be a little different, but it's about that ability to know where you're going and helping everybody out. Schuler's obviously picked it up, and good for him. They got good DB coaches, Mickens and everybody, but I love the fact that there's competition. So at the very least, you're talking about one guy comes out, you rotate in the other guy. They're going to have very little, if any, drop-off, regardless of which player starts for the Irish.
Brian will be right back here with me in a second to provide the latest on where things stand with Notre Dame and Deuce Knight. But first, a word from our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing quite like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. If you want to bet on some baseball, just go to FanDuel.com. They've got a ton of boosts ready for you. And look, I'm not the biggest baseball gambler, but I saw a couple of them. I'm like, man, that's a really good opportunity. So I would encourage you to jump on that. Or if you're in the college football mood and you're ready to hit some season win total over or unders, go to FanDuel. There's plenty of great options for you there. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, it wouldn't be a recruiting podcast if we didn't talk about Deuce Knight. At this point, we are taping here on Wednesday afternoon. He is still committed to the Irish. I know Auburn still feels very confident that he's going to flip potentially by the end of this month. But to be honest with you, Brian, I fully expected him to decommit last week. That didn't happen. So what have you heard about a timeline with his decision-making process? Because it seems like there's all kinds of conflicting reports out there.
Anybody you talk to has a different timeline. I was on an Auburn podcast earlier today. I'm going to say the same thing I did there. Regardless of what he does this month, if anything, this is a National Signing Day deal. Everybody just started throwing things and moaning. Doesn't matter. That's the way this is. He has not been very consistent with what's going on with everybody. Why would I believe that it's going to be consistent moving forward? So flip or not, I know Ole Miss is definitely in this. Auburn obviously is. I don't know if anybody else is. At this point, I don't think everybody has all the information. So I've heard Auburn, but that's what everybody says. It's kind of like a bandwagon at this point. But why hasn't he pulled the trigger too? So I've lost interest in finding out why. I'm just wanting it to be over. I have zero interest in it at this point.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, according to what you're saying, it's not going to be over anytime soon. But
Correct.
Let's go back in time for a little bit here because, you know, his actions for the longest time all seem to indicate that he was going to Notre Dame. I mean, he visited campus, I think, 10 times, which is more than the vast majority of other players who are committed to Notre Dame, especially one coming from Mississippi. But all the while, there was always a little bit of uncertainty. And it makes sense. Like, his hometown, where he's from, is not a place where Notre Dame would typically look for high school prospects. He's not your typical Notre Dame fit, but by all accounts, it seems like he really bought into everything. I also think that it's really interesting that Notre Dame recruited him very early on. Like, Deuce Knight today is much different than the Deuce Knight that committed to Notre Dame a year ago, just in terms of his ranking, the attention that he's getting. And then you think all the way back to when Notre Dame first started looking at him, like, he was a little bit off the radar. So how do you think his stardom, I think you could say, has impacted his decision? Because when Notre Dame first got on him, he was not that big of a star. Now he's a 5-star consensus, and he has all this attention on him, and now he's considering all of his options.
I mean, I don't know exactly the way it works in a 17-year-old's mind nowadays, but like, I think the biggest thing is his rise this spring. He started seeing a quarterback trainer at QB country down in Mobile. He's gotten a lot better at the actual passing game and making plays from the pocket. I think he just wanted to look around. I know he's been to Ole Miss and Auburn and all this. He probably is surprised at how much better he's gotten. But did the rankings really do it? I don't know. I think Deuce is a pretty basic guy. Just talking to him, I think he just realized how good he is. So I don't think that's any shock. Like, his leaps and bounds are very obvious just since January. So I'm not surprised if anybody looks at it that way, but Deuce, pretty quiet kid. He's kind of an all shucks guy. So I'm not sure the rankings and all that are all that much to it, but he wants to play early. And it's ironic because Ole Miss, Auburn, and Notre Dame, I'm not sure any of them are conducive to playing right away, but we'll see how that goes too.
That actually leads me right to my next question, because I think out of all the schools, he could probably play the earliest at Auburn, because no matter what happens with Deuce Knight, the best case scenario for the Notre Dame quarterback room is that CJ Carr ends up being really, really good. If he's as advertised and he's as good as people think he can be, The earliest that Knight would probably see the field is 2027. Now, I know that Notre Dame could bring him in like different run packages, but they wouldn't fully give him the keys until 2027 because let's say CJ Carr redshirts this season, starts the next two, he's an NFL player, leaves early for the draft after the 2026 season. Like, that is a long time. And I think that is not being talked about enough because it's easy to try to get Deuce Knight to commit now, but the better that CJ Carr plays, the harder it is for Deuce Knight to get on the field, even if we all agree that he has a ton of talent and a ton of potential. So do you think that playing time, the situation at Notre Dame, is actually kind of hurting them because they have a guy like CJ Carr ahead of him right now?
I would imagine it does, and there's nothing you can do about that. Everybody knows that he's kind of next, but I've heard really good things about Minchie in fall camp too. So he probably thinks now that he can play early. Before he got better, he probably didn't think he was going to play right away. So that's not Notre Dame's fault if I'm speculating correctly there, and nothing you can do about it. In Auburn's situation, they're probably going to the portal after this year. So their quarterback, I just went to their scrimmage. They probably need to go to the portal. So he's not going to play next year there. And there's a kid ahead of him, a year, Walker White, that was a very highly touted kid. They just signed out of the 24 class. So if you're going to play in the SEC, you're probably going to wait at least a couple years. If you're going to play at Notre Dame, you're probably going to wait a couple years. It's just the way it is. And that's why all these kids jumping in the portal in general, if they don't start as sophomores, I laugh.
Yeah, it's like, what do you think is going to happen when you have all these guys in front of you? That's why I'm rooting for Kenny Minchie. You mentioned him having a good camp. Like, I hope he does well because I think he is a really talented player. And once Carr committed and once Knight committed, everyone sort of forgot about him. But I was like, he's a good player. And he's sticking around. He said, hey, I want to be the quarterback at Notre Dame. So I think he definitely is going to have a chance to be that quarterback next year if he sticks around. But no matter what happens with Deuce Knight, if he leaves, Notre Dame fans are going to be really upset. If he stays committed, they're probably just going to be worried he's going to be transferring at any point in time. But I think the fact that they recognized him, the staff I'm referring to now, the fact that they realized that Deuce Knight could be this elite talent so early on and really before everyone else in the country did, I find encouraging. And it makes me feel better about Noah Grubb, who is their quarterback commit in the class of 2026. You and I have talked about him before. What do you think his ceiling is? Like, do you think that he has the chance to really climb up the board? So do you think that he's kind of reached the ceiling in terms of like the recruiting rankings and compared to other quarterbacks in his class?
No, Noah's really talented. He could end up being a top 10 pick in the draft. He's got a big arm. He's 6'3", 195. He's got a good training regimen. He's working with Balin. He's a very good quarterback trainer, doing all the little things off the field. And from everything I've been told and based on seeing him play a number of times, he understands the ball movement, the looking off the safety, all the little different things, level 1, level 2, level 3 ball, throw in the middle of the field, in between guys, that most kids in college, like CJ's age especially, don't do. And this kid just finished his sophomore year of high school. He's got 2 more years left. So Grubbs is an advanced player, and his mind works a little bit, kind of like CJ in that regard, because CJ post-snap is very good. That's why so many guys in the NFL draft end up being busts. If you can't figure out post-snap reads, you're done. It is a one checkbox, and there's zero chance there's any way that you can figure that out before the draft, which drives people crazy. You're not going to know. Because when you have 300-pound guys running at you, some people don't calculate things very well. You can't predict that. So it's the same thing with high school to college. But if he figures that out and continues on this trajectory, you're talking about a guy who can be a top 10 pick.
When you said he still has 2 more years of high school football, like, you're right, but it's almost just like a shock. Like, man, we're already talking about this kid and his future at Notre Dame. Why is it that quarterback prospects commit so early on compared to other positions? Is it just because there's one spot? It does seem like that's become more of a trend, though, lately, where guys are committing earlier and earlier.
100%. I interviewed Grubbs about a month or so ago down in Bradenton. And I asked him, I mean, I'd been around him. I said, hey, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, right off the bat, why Notre Dame? And like, what was the precedent for it? He said it was his first spring visit. They set the bar very high. And he just told me nobody else he took a bunch of visits, Carolina, Michigan, Florida, all kinds of places. And Notre Dame was the one that stood out. And he asked himself, why am I waiting? And he was just very matter of fact about it. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And that was the end of it. He told his parents, he told Balin, and he told his brothers, and that was it. And he called Freeman.
Well, it seemed like their pitch work on him. And I think another thing that's interesting about Grubbs is the fact that he's from Florida, which means, let's say Deuce Knight stays committed to Notre Dame. There would be a quarterback from Mississippi and a quarterback from Florida in back-to-back classes. I know that Notre Dame has been, I guess, criticized a little bit, the staff, by some of the fans. Some people are saying, well, you should have always known that Deuce Knight was going to flip, or you should have always known that he was going to be, kind of waffling on his commitment a little bit. But I feel like you should just go all in, and you aren't going to get these type of classes if you aren't willing to recruit in these territories that have been dominated by the SEC for years. Now they're doing it. They might get burned with Deuce Knight, but they got another Florida commit in Noah Grubbs. So what do you make of their strategy and their aggressiveness? Do you think it was the right move, even if Deuce Knight ends up decommitting?
I don't see anything wrong with going after the player you think it gives you the best chance to win. That's it. Freeman doesn't shy away from the competition. It's one of the reasons I think he can win a national title at Notre Dame. You have to get the players before the coaching starts. It's just the way it is, man. The NFL level, it's a lot more based on the draft and getting a little bit of luck with injury. In college, you can just roll it. Look at what Kirby's doing. I mean, he gets the number one draft pick after winning the Super Bowl essentially every year. It's different. But you have to go take it away from the king if you're going to beat the king. They're recruiting heavily. I'm going to see a couple kids in Georgia over the next few days, some of which Notre Dame are looking at in the 26 class. These are kids that Georgia wants. Notre Dame doesn't care. That's just the way it is. So I like what they're doing because remember that comment that Kelly said, shopping down a different aisle? I'd have been arrested if I'd have been in the room with it. That is one of the dumbest comments I've ever heard an otherwise intelligent human being make. Well, wait, this be 8-4, 9. That's not how it works. They leave. So he got tired of it, and he did. Notre Dame could recruit better. Freeman proved it because he went out and tried. Kelly was lazy sometimes with the recruiting and sometimes just thought they couldn't do it or something. I don't know. It's very bizarre. But Freeman's proven it. He's already got 2 commits in the state of Florida to start 26. They got kids visiting from Florida and Georgia and other places already. You can get those kids if you put in the effort. Yes, Notre Dame is different, but the kids that visit typically like it. Jazavion Currents is a kid from Rock Hill, South Carolina that just visited. He said it was unbelievable. He said the Golden Dome was like it was illuminated. It was incredible and all this. He's been to every school in the South. Thought the Notre Dame visit was the best. You just don't know until you get them on campus.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the whole Kelly recruiting situation at Notre Dame, it makes less and less sense by the day, especially when you look at the success that LSU has had lately on the recruiting trail. And obviously, recruiting at LSU is much different than Notre Dame. But anyway, that's a topic for a different podcast in a different time. I want to talk about wide receiver recruiting because, as we've talked about a lot, Notre Dame whiffed on their top 3 guys in this class in 2025. Now, they're sort of, I don't want to say scrambling because that sounds a little bit desperate, but they have to look at alternative options, and those options aren't always great, and they might have to do things that are a little bit more difficult. That being trying to flip guys who are currently committed to other schools, and it looks like they're looking into Jace Brown, who is a 3-star wide receiver, recently committed to UCLA just over a month ago. He's from Southern California, but Notre Dame appears to be in the mix here. Have you had a chance to look at him and evaluate his film?
He's a bigger receiver in terms of his height. He's a kid that'll end up topping out probably a little over 200 pounds. Plays at a good program. He's used to playing against good comp. I mean, he's out there where you are in LA. It's certainly very good high school football. I'm not surprised that Notre Dame is going after him. I'm just surprised he's a 3-star on like some of the services. I was a little bit disappointed with that, but okay, not everybody can be a 4-star. The only other thing about him, that's a kid that committed to UCLA. No offense, but the way they're recruiting, especially how that press conference went for their head coach not all that long ago, that was weird. Do you really think he's going to end up there if it's not Notre Dame, probably somewhere else? I have a feeling that's going to be the case. That could be a great fit. They need a bigger receiver in this class to kind of go along with things. It's always hard to get those guys, so I think it's a good fit for Notre Dame.
Okay, switching over to the defense, Notre Dame is still in the mix for Madden Framo and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, 2 elite linebackers in the class of 2025. And at one point, it felt like the Irish led for both. I'm not sure if that's changed. It's just quieter surrounding both of their recruitments at this point. I think when when all that conversation was going on, it was right after June, right after the official visit. So everyone's excited. They're seeing the pictures and all of that. So they're really pumped and thought that a commitment from either one of those guys was imminent. Do you have any new updates that you can provide about either prospect and when they might make a decision?
I think from everything I've been told, that'll be later in the process for both. With Wu, I especially think that'll be closer to signing day. I don't know the kid from California personally, but I read something about that. He's going to take his time, make sure he makes the right decision and all that. It is what it is. It's more traditional recruiting. This is how it was in the 80s and 90s. Kids waited till late November, early December to make decisions.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that this season is going to have a big impact on what Notre Dame does in this class and beyond, because it's safe to say that Notre Dame has not been able to recruit the elite 5-star players like many would have hoped when Marcus Freeman took over as head coach. Now it seems like they're willing to spend a little bit of NIL money on high school prospects, which is a bit of a change. But I really think that this season and what Notre Dame does with all these expectations and the expanded playoff is going to go so far. Do you think that they have a chance to change their perception among the top recruits with a big season this year?
It depends on your perception of that. Like, let's put it like this. Everybody wants to know when they're getting the elite receivers. Let me put any end to what people want to hear because they won't like this very much. Those kids want to know who's put the first and second round picks in the draft. Post tense, like they past tense. They don't want to hear what you're going to do. Notre Dame's in a bad spot there. They really need Gilbert and guys like that to hit. Because right now in the upperclassmen, I think they got a bunch of number twos. I don't think they got a pure number one guy that the NFL is screaming for. Maybe one of them ends. I think Mikey Gilbert could be that guy because he's big and he's athletic. He's kind of a late bloomer, but he's a freshman. So they're going to have to find a way to get around that for a while. And the other thing is those kids by and large want the big NIL upfront money. Those are all the things I know Notre Dame fans don't want to hear, but it's still true. These are face-to-face conversations. It's going to be hard, but if they win 10 plus games this year, if they win 11, like go 11-1, maybe that does change. It only takes like one guy too. Like they didn't necessarily have to get Micah Gilbert, but they did. They didn't have to necessarily get a bunch of these tight ends that everybody wanted. They did. Offensive tackles, they still did. They just need one guy to kind of get them over the hump. If they have a great season, who's to say they can't do that?
I agree. And you and I talked a lot about these players in the class of 2024. It feels like it's been a while because it has, but with the season getting closer and closer by the way, who are some of the freshmen that you're most excited to see take the field for the Irish this year? I know you mentioned a couple like Mikey Gilbert, but is there anyone else that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, I'm curious if Bryce Young, just because it's so hard as a defensive lineman to play as a freshman, but we've heard really good things about him in camp. If something were to happen, and I'm not voting for this, obviously, but if a certain quarterback goes down, which he's done quite a bit in the last year, starting with the Notre Dame game last year, does CJ Carr get a chance to play at any right? I wouldn't think so, but then again, maybe he does. It depends on if it's a season-ending injury or whatever to Riley Leonard. I'm sure one of the freshmen on defense will play in a rotational role. Obviously, inside linebacker, there's a certain young man from California, your neck of woods. Zero chance he's not going to play in rotation. Curious to see if they use him more of as a blitzer and not a first and 10 guy because like safety, linebacker's hard. But really, I mean, they're so deep, there's not a lot of room. And even though like both the freshmen, Aeneas is good, all those guys in the running back room and stuff are good in front of them too. So where does somebody break out? I just think they're all going to be role players this year because Notre Dame's finally in a spot where they're not like, man, we are terrible at this spot. Last year, you could even say, like, going into like the receiver room.
Yeah, they're terrible. I mean, that's why they played Rico Flores probably well before he was ready.
Yeah, well,
to at least be playing that much.
Yeah, like if Micah Gilbert would have been on last year's team, he'd have been starting. Micah won't be in the top 6 this year. Totally different roster. So I think most of the kids that are freshmen, that even the really good ones, will probably play 3 to 5 games because they're not going to be needed as much. It's a good thing, but we'll see more of them in 25 than we will in 24.
Which freshman do you think is going to have the biggest impact this season when it's all said and done? Because personally, I think it's going to be Kingston. I don't necessarily think he's going to start right away, but I think that there's a real chance that by halfway through the season, he takes over that starting Mike linebacker spot.
I think that's a possibility, and I also think Kedron could have a role even earlier because they need a power back. He's reportedly pushing 230 pounds. And that joker, when he picks him up, puts him down, comes at you, you're making a decision. that is not a good time. He's just pretty much built like the guy that just left and went to the NFL. Like, you can't teach that. Like, he is put together. Those two, maybe Bryce, but I just don't think anybody else is going to play that much.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we're going to see in College Station here just over 2 weeks away, but that is all the time we have today, Brian. Always appreciate the time, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, sir.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Whether you've been planning to go to a game for weeks, or if you're feeling spontaneous and you want to hit up their nearby ballpark, Gametime is the perfect place for you. I was feeling spontaneous last week when I decided to go to a Dodgers-Phillies game. Ended up going, having a great time, all thanks to Gametime. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy. But my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows you your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode, and that is another week of Locked On Irish in the books. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. I'm going to be back here early next week, and for your second listen, check out the Locked On College Football Podcast with host Spencer McLaughlin. Spencer does a great job talking about the sport as a whole. I've been tuning in lately, really enjoyed what Spencer's doing. I think I'm going to be joining him in the near future too, so you're going to want to check that out. Also, remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to podcasts. Have a great weekend, everybody. I'll see you next week.